From the outside, the Ellis mansion looked like something out of a dream. An endless driveway lined with manicured hedges, glass windows so tall they seemed to scrape the sky, and a front door so heavy it took 2 hands to push open. It was the kind of place where whispers traveled slower than rumors, but money moved faster than the wind. Inside those marble walls lived a little girl named Amara Ellis. 7 years old, hair like spun gold, and eyes so pale they seemed to catch the light like mirrors. She had everything a child could want: designer clothes, a room full of toys, even her own indoor playhouse. But she had never spoken a single word. Doctors called it selective mutism. Therapists called it trauma. Her father, Cameron Ellis, called it a problem to be fixed. But Amara just lived in her quiet world, floating through her days like a shadow in silk dresses. She had learned that silence was easier than the weight of eyes expecting her to perform. And so, her words stayed locked inside her chest like precious treasure she refused to spend. Cameron Ellis was a man who built his empire from the ground up: real estate, tech investments, luxury developments, you name it, he had a stake in it. But while he could negotiate billion-dollar contracts without blinking, he couldn't find a way to reach his own daughter. Her mother had been gone for years. Some said she ran, others said she drowned in the emptiness of wealth, but no one really knew. What was certain was that Amara's silence had only deepened after her mother's disappearance. And then came Layla. Layla Jackson was hired quietly, without the press catching wind. Cameron wanted someone trustworthy, discreet, and different. Layla was a 32-year-old single mother from Atlanta with a voice warm enough to melt ice and a presence that made even the coldest rooms feel safe. She didn't come with fancy degrees or glowing recommendations from elite nanny agencies, but she had something no one else in that mansion did: patience. From the very first morning, Layla noticed that Amara didn't just avoid speaking, she avoided connecting. The girl's eyes slid away when people spoke to her, her hands stayed clasped in her lap, and she walked like she was trying not to leave footprints. Layla didn't push her. Instead, she sat beside her during meals, read stories aloud in the afternoons, and hummed while braiding her hair. It was the humming that caught Amara's attention. The first time she heard it, her head tilted ever so slightly, like she was trying to remember something. But as quickly as the spark came, it vanished and she returned to her quiet. Still, Layla kept humming, little gospel tunes, lullabies from her own childhood, even improvised melodies that seemed to weave warmth into the air. Weeks passed and the mansion staff began to notice something strange. Amara, who had always drifted through the halls like a ghost, was now trailing after Layla. She sat closer during story time. She lingered longer during hair braiding. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would move her lips, silently, like she was trying out words. But Cameron didn't notice. He was too busy traveling, hosting investors, and chasing deals that kept him away most nights. Layla, though, could feel it. Something in the girl was shifting, softening. She could see it in the way Amara's eyes followed her when she sang. And then one rainy afternoon it happened. The house was quiet except for the patter of rain against the windows. Layla was folding laundry in Amara's room, humming a slow, soulful tune her grandmother used to sing. And that's when she heard it, so faint she almost thought it was the wind. A voice. Small, soft, fragile, but real. Layla froze, her heart pounding, afraid to scare it away. Amara was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her little hands gripping her stuffed bunny. Her lips moved and the sound came again, matching Layla's melody. The silent heiress was singing. And in that moment, Layla knew the walls around Amara's heart were starting to crack. But what neither of them knew was that someone else had heard it too. Cameron Ellis, standing in the doorway. Cameron Ellis stood frozen in the wide frame of his daughter's bedroom door, the kind of stillness that only came when something you thought was impossible suddenly unfolded right in front of you. He had arrived home earlier than expected, the rain delaying his flight and forcing him to abandon yet another late-night meeting. Normally, he would have gone straight to his study, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and buried himself in work until the exhaustion won. But something, maybe the faint hum of music, had drawn him upstairs instead. And there it was, his daughter. His silent, unreachable child. Sitting on the floor, swaying gently, singing. The sound was almost too fragile to exist, like if he breathed too hard it would shatter. For a man used to commanding boardrooms and bulldozing obstacles, Cameron suddenly felt like an intruder in his own home. This wasn't a business deal to negotiate, it was a miracle happening in real time. Layla hadn't noticed him yet. She was still folding laundry, her eyes soft, her humming steady, letting Amara's voice fill in the spaces. It wasn't perfect. Amara's pitch wavered, her words were faint, but it was alive. Cameron's mind scrambled to make sense of it. For 7 years, specialists had told him breakthroughs like this were rare, that his daughter might never speak again, that they should focus on alternative communication methods. He had sat through endless therapy sessions where Amara stared blankly at walls. And now, without warning, without preparation, she was singing? And it wasn't with a therapist. It wasn't with him. It was with the nanny. He should have been overjoyed. He should have rushed in, scooped her into his arms, and thanked the heavens. But another feeling was stirring inside him, sharp and unwelcome: resentment. Why hadn't she spoken for him? Layla finally turned her head, catching sight of Cameron in the doorway. For a split second, their eyes locked, hers wide with surprise, his unreadable. The room suddenly felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Amara followed Layla's gaze and froze when she saw her father. The little melody on her lips died instantly, retreating back into the silence she knew so well. The moment was gone. Cameron stepped into the room, his polished shoes tapping against the hardwood floor, each step too loud in the stillness. Layla straightened, folding the last shirt as if bracing herself. Amara clutched her stuffed bunny tighter and scooted back, her small shoulders curling inward. He didn't say a word. He just looked at them, first at his daughter, then at Layla, and something about the way his jaw tightened made it clear this wasn't going to be a celebration. That night, the mansion felt colder than usual. Cameron barely spoke during dinner, his mind replaying the image of his daughter singing, but also the uncomfortable truth that it had nothing to do with him. Layla moved quietly through her evening routine, but her thoughts were loud. She had seen men like Cameron before, powerful, proud, unable to process emotion without turning it into control. She had a bad feeling about what was coming. Amara didn't sing again that night. She didn't even hum. She just sat on her bed, staring out the rain-streaked window, her stuffed bunny tucked under her chin like it could shield her from whatever was shifting in the air. And downstairs, Cameron made a phone call, to someone who had been waiting for an opportunity to remind him that control in his household was never to be shared. The storm outside was starting to pass. But inside the Ellis mansion, another one was about to begin. The next morning, the Ellis mansion didn't feel the same. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows was as golden as ever, the breakfast table laid out with silverware and fine china, but beneath it all was a tension you could taste. The kind of tension that makes the walls listen. Cameron Ellis sat at the head of the table, his suit perfectly pressed, his coffee untouched. He was watching. Not reading the news, not scanning his phone, just watching. Every move Layla made, every flicker of expression on Amara's face, every small detail that might explain what he had witnessed the night before. Layla kept her head down, buttering toast for Amara, speaking softly even though she knew the girl wouldn't respond. The child sat quiet as usual, picking at her eggs, her small body leaning ever so slightly toward Layla like she was her anchor. Cameron noticed that too. For years he had believed the solution to Amara's silence was simply the right specialist, the right program, the right costly intervention. He had paid for private clinics, flown in experts from overseas, invested in every recommendation money could buy. Yet none of it had worked. And now, without any of his resources, without his involvement, Layla, a woman he had hired from a modest background, had cracked the door open to his daughter's voice. It didn't sit right with him. By mid-morning, Cameron had retreated to his study. He called Dr. Alan Pierce, Amara's longtime speech therapist, and explained, carefully, that Amara had made some progress the night before. He didn't mention the singing. He didn't mention Layla. Instead, he asked Dr. Pierce to come by for an unscheduled session that afternoon. Layla overheard the tail end of the call. She knew what it meant. If Cameron was bringing in a professional without warning her, it wasn't just about helping Amara, it was about control. He wanted to put his name on this breakthrough, to claim it before anyone else could. When Dr. Pierce arrived, the air in the mansion tightened even further. He was a tall man in a gray suit, polite in his greetings but clinical in his gaze. Amara shrank back the moment he stepped into the room, her fingers curling into the hem of Layla's cardigan. Cameron instructed Layla to step back, during the session, saying it was important for Amara to focus without distraction. Layla didn't argue, she knew battles were won with patience, not outbursts, But the look she gave him as she left the room carried more truth than words could. From the hallway she listened. Dr. Pierce used his usual techniques. Flashcards, gentle questions, a toy microphone meant to make speaking fun. But Amara was silent. Not shy silent. Not thinking silent. This was locked down, Stonewall, you can't make me silent. Cameron's voice cut in now and then, urging her to try, telling her how proud he'd be if she said something. But it was the wrong kind of pressure, the kind that made the little girl's shoulders hunch further, her eyes darting toward the door, toward the place where she knew Layla was waiting. The session ended without a single sound from Amara. Dr. Pierce packed his bag, offering professional reassurances that progress takes time, and these things aren't linear. But Cameron's face was tight, his jaw locked. After the therapist left, Layla returned to Amara's side. She didn't push her to talk or sing. She just sat beside her on the floor, humming softly, letting the melody fill the space between them. And slowly, the tension in Amara's tiny frame began to ease. Upstairs, Cameron stood on the landing watching them again. This time he didn't just see a nanny and a child, he saw loyalty forming. Trust that didn't include him. And for a man like Cameron Ellis that was dangerous. By nightfall he had made a decision. Layla wouldn't see it coming. Cameron Ellis didn't sleep that night. He paced his study, the dim light from the desk lamp throwing long shadows across the walls. His mind replayed every detail of the past 24 hours, the sound of Amara's small voice, the way she leaned into Layla, the complete shutdown when Dr. Pierce arrived. It gnawed at him. It wasn't just that Layla had been the first to reach Amara, it was that Layla could. Without credentials, without money, without his oversight. It disrupted the neat, ordered system Cameron had built around his daughter's care. In his world, control was everything. And right now, Layla was holding a piece of it. By morning, his decision was set. He would confront her, not angrily but firmly. Make it clear that this arrangement could only work on his terms. Layla arrived in the kitchen early as always, preparing breakfast before Amara wandered down in her soft pajamas. She had learned that mornings were the girl's safest time. No lessons, no visitors, just a quiet start. But as she poured juice into a small glass, Cameron walked in, his presence as sharp as a knife in the air. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He told her, in measured words, that her role was to follow his instructions. That whatever bond she believed she had with Amara needed to be handled within the framework he had approved. That the incident with the singing should have been reported to him immediately, so he could have been present to guide it. Layla listened without interrupting, her hands steady even though his tone carried an edge. When he finished, she calmly reminded him that Amara's progress couldn't be forced into a schedule or a performance. That sometimes trust bloomed in moments you couldn't orchestrate. She didn't challenge his authority outright, but she didn't bow to it either. That only made him more certain. The ultimatum came swiftly. Either Layla agreed to follow a new, stricter structure for Amara's care, one that involved more professional oversight and less unsupervised bonding, or she would need to step aside so someone else could finish the job. For a moment, silence hung between them. In that pause, Amara padded into the kitchen, her bunny tucked under one arm. She glanced between them, sensing the stiffness in the air. Her eyes lingered on Layla, searching for reassurance. Layla smiled at her, soft and steady, even as her heart tightened. She knew this wasn't just about a job anymore, it was about protecting the fragile bridge she'd built with a little girl who had been silent for too long. But Cameron's gaze was unyielding. This was a man who never lost, who never gave ground. That afternoon, Layla found herself avoiding the subject with Amara, focusing instead on their usual rhythm. Reading in the garden, coloring at the small table in her room, humming old gospel tunes when the silence felt too heavy. But inside she was weighing her options. If she pushed too hard, she could lose her place in Amara's life. If she stayed quiet, she might lose the very trust she had worked so carefully to earn. Cameron, meanwhile, was already taking steps. A call to the agency. Quiet inquiries to families with experienced child specialists. His mind was already moving toward replacing her, convinced it was in Amara's best interest, or perhaps in his own. Neither of them knew it yet, but the real test wasn't going to be about obedience or control. It was going to come on a day when Amara would be forced to choose, silence or voice, comfort or fear. And when that day came, the balance of power in the Ellis mansion would change forever. 2 days after the ultimatum, the Ellis mansion seemed almost too quiet. Even the staff moved slower, speaking in lowered voices as if the air itself was holding its breath. Layla had agreed, at least on the surface, to follow Cameron's new structure. She had nodded at his instructions, kept her responses polite, and avoided open defiance. But inside she was waiting. Watching. Amara too could sense the difference. The laughter that sometimes danced in Layla's eyes had dimmed. The easy hum of songs had grown softer, more careful, as if they might be overheard and taken away. The little girl stayed closer than ever to Layla's side, her small hand often curling into the fabric of her sweater like an anchor. Cameron, however, believed he was regaining control. That morning he had arranged for yet another specialist to visit. A woman named Dr. Langley, whose glowing resume boasted breakthroughs with nonverbal children. She arrived with a rolling case of tools, laminated charts, and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. From the start it went wrong. Dr. Langley's voice was too loud, her questions too quick. She crouched in front of Amara, placing bright cards in her lap, asking her to repeat words she had never said before. The pressure built with every minute. Cameron hovered nearby, offering coaxing phrases, telling Amara she could do it, urging her to just try. But Amara's eyes darted toward Layla, who had been instructed to stay back. The little girl's lips parted once, like she might attempt a sound, but when Dr. Langley leaned closer, it snapped shut again. Her bunny was clutched so tightly now that its fur was pressed flat under her fingers. Layla's hands itched to step in. She could feel the panic rising in Amara, the same way she had felt it in her own son years ago when strangers tried to force him to perform before he was ready. She shifted forward slightly, but Cameron's sharp glance froze her in place. Then it happened. Dr. Langley reached to take the bunny from Amara's grip, saying she'd give it back after the exercise. The child's reaction was instant. Her breath hitched, her head shook violently, and her entire body twisted away. The look in her eyes wasn't stubbornness, it was fear. Layla couldn't watch it any longer. She crossed the room and knelt beside Amara, placing a hand gently over hers. The bunny stayed put. The room fell silent except for the child's uneven breathing. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, Amara spoke. "Don't." The single word hung in the air like it had been shouted. Everyone froze, Dr. Langley mid-motion, Cameron mid-step. It was the first time she had spoken an actual word in years, and it hadn't been coaxed out by charts or exercises. It had been drawn out by protection, by trust. Layla's eyes softened, her hands still covering Amara's. Cameron's expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. The power in the room had shifted, not toward him, not toward the specialist, but toward the bond between the nanny and his daughter. Dr. Langley packed her case quickly, muttering something about needing more gradual approaches. The moment she left, Cameron dismissed the staff for the day, his mind clearly turning over what had just happened. That night, the mansion was quiet again, but it was no longer the same kind of quiet. Something had cracked wide open and Cameron knew it. Layla knew it too. And deep in her small bed, Amara clutched her bunny and mouthed the word again in the dark, testing it, owning it. The day after Amara's first spoken word, the Ellis mansion carried a different kind of stillness, one that wasn't heavy with tension but charged with possibility. The memory of that small, defiant "don't" lingered in every corner, echoing louder in Cameron's mind than any business deal he had ever closed. For the first time in years he began to truly see his daughter. Not as a project to fix, not as a responsibility to manage, but as a person, one who had chosen to speak for someone she trusted. It stung that the trust wasn't placed in him, but it also lit a spark of something unfamiliar in his chest: humility. The morning began as usual. Layla prepared breakfast, Amara trailing behind her like a quiet shadow. Cameron entered the kitchen without his usual sharpness, his eyes following the little girl as she climbed onto her seat. He didn't push, didn't press her to speak again. He simply watched. After breakfast, Layla suggested they spend the day in the sunroom. The wide glass walls let in golden light, and the rain-washed garden outside looked freshly painted. Amara settled on the rug with her coloring book, while Layla hummed the same gospel tune that had started everything. At first, Amara only listened, her crayon moving in small, slow strokes. Then, without looking up, she began to hum along. It was soft, uncertain, but it was music. Layla kept her voice steady, letting the melody wrap around them both like a warm blanket. And then, like the unfurling of a flower, Amara's hum shifted into words. Not whispered, not broken, sung. Her voice was small but clear, carrying each note as if it had been waiting years to be released. Cameron had stepped into the doorway without either of them noticing. This time he didn't interrupt. He didn't make his presence known. He just stood there listening, really listening, for the first time. He could see now that the song wasn't just about music. It was a bridge. When the song ended, Amara looked up at Layla with a shy smile. And for the first time she turned toward her father, meeting his eyes. She didn't speak, not yet, but in that glance was an unspoken promise. The words will come. In my time. Cameron nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement. He still didn't fully understand how Layla had done it, but he knew she had earned her place here. More than that, she had given him a glimpse of the daughter he thought he had lost forever. That night, as the sun dipped behind the mansion's tall windows, the house didn't feel cold. Layla read stories in her warm, steady voice, Amara curled against her side, and somewhere in the hall, Cameron lingered just close enough to hear. The heiress who had never spoken had found her first words. And her first song. And it all began because someone had cared enough to listen to the silence. Dream Tales, where every story shows that even in the quietest hearts, there's a voice waiting to be heard. Sparkles, subscribe for more heart-touching drama stories, share this with someone who needs hope, and let us know in the comments. What did this story make you feel?